quite honestly, I think one of the reasons why the movie works is that it did not begin as a high concept idea. It began, as most good stories do, as a story about two characters.
I saw a documentary on television about Stephen Hawking and the work that he was doing, which promised to finish what Einstein had started in terms of unifying all the knowledge of the cosmos. And I thought that given his condition, ALS, I imagined a point at which he had figured out the answer, but he would be immobilized and couldn't communicate it to anyone. And I thought, what an amazing situation. He really needs a son figure who could understand him and help him communicate.
The idea of a supremely gifted kid in an environment that doesn't necessarily have the means to recognize his gifts was interesting to me. And in fact, I started reading about gifted kids.
Walter Parks, who I had been roommates with at college, he asked me what I was working on, and I told him about this project. And I had the idea that we would both write it.
We had always talked about working on things together. And it seemed like these two impulses, the young genius that does not know his place in the world and the older genius who somehow needs to pass on whatever wisdom he has, seemed to be interesting poles for a story.
I think it was called The Genius. And he was 13 years old, and he was attending Cal Berkeley, and he was a fish out of water, but he was brilliant. I said, it's a very good idea, an original idea. I liked them.
We proposed to Leonard Goldberg a research period where we would go and find out how could a kid on his own get into the kind of trouble where he'd come to the attention of someone like a Stephen Hawking. And the original idea had nothing to do with nuclear war or even computers.
We looked into kind of the farthest reaches of technology because we wanted to have a picture of what world he would be entering into in his journey. All of this led us to like a key moment.
Shall we play a game?
Oh. We came upon a man named Peter Schwartz, who's gone on to have an extraordinary career as a futurist. And we described our story. And Peter thought for a second. He said, well, you've ever heard of computer games? He said, they're quite amazing, and you can really use some controls and cause things to happen on the screen, and you're in control of it. Well, if you look at that, and then if you look at the missile displays that occur at NORAD or at Strategic Air Command, you might see the kind of parallel between your two characters. And Larry and I are sitting thinking, I took down some notes and thanked them profusely.
And the other great discovery we made, this was 1979, was home computers, which I had known nothing about. And then we looked into the hacker culture. Oh, well, this is great. This is how our kid could get into real trouble. The other big piece of the puzzle was an article written by a friend of mine from Yale named Ron Rosenbaum. And he had written a piece called The Underground World of the Bomb. And it talked about missile commanders with their keys and this whole simulations that they do for WarGames.
On my mark, launch key inserted. Roger.
That kind of was the missing piece. Gee, what if he thought he was accessing a video game company, but actually it was the simulation program for our nuclear missiles? That's interesting.
Every now and then, NORAD or SAC would invite people from Hollywood to check out what they were doing. And I think we talked our way onto one of those pre-existing tours.
They flew us there on a C-130 transport, and we had the tour of the Crystal Palace. After the tour, we were walking back to the bus to go with the tour back to the hotel, and General Hardinger, who was the head of NORAD, comes up, puts his arms around our shoulders, and he says, fellas, I understand you're writing a movie about me. And we said, well, yes, we're doing some research. And he says, come on, let's have a drink. And I remember Walter said, well, we're supposed to go with the bus. And he goes, God damn it, I have 50,000 men under my command. I think I can get you back to your hotel. Now, come on.
The other thing that really struck us was just how professional and smart the people running the place were, particularly General Hardinger. And that kind of like can-do energy and competence really was shocking to us and very much provided the background, the foundation of the character of Barry Corbin. In the original script, the Falcon character is dying. And all the way through, we had one picture in our mind about who would play Falcon. I mean, in the original script, in which David Lightman finally found his way to the island and finally found his way to kind of the epicenter of this whole mystery, the Great Falcon. And he sees a pier going out from the land. He sees a man in a high-tech wheelchair fishing. And David walked up to him. The idea was that you'd see his hand hit a control and the wheelchair would turn and would reveal John Lennon. And it was just like such an amazing idea to think we could ever have that in a movie. Talk about moments to remember. We were literally working at the time when we heard about the assassination.
In creating the character of Joshua, we did research on the history of teaching machines how to play games, which is the beginning of AI, artificial intelligence.
There's almost a subgenre that's existed since the 60s of, movies, novels, stories, television shows about technology that goes out of whack. There was a wonderful, I think, underappreciated movie called Colossus the Forbin Project. And it very early kind of postulated the idea of machines becoming intelligent. That was essential for us because we wanted to really create a character in Joshua. This started off as a character story between the Falcon character and David Lightman. It soon developed where the conduit for these two characters' relationship was this artificially intelligent program, Joshua.
We had started writing the script, but Walter was like, is anyone going to believe this, that the military could think that they're under attack, because some kid is playing a video game? And I turned on at the time, the 6 o'clock CBS News, and Walter Cronkite, his first words were, for 3 minutes yesterday, the United States believed it was under a full-scale military attack. And it was a simulation tape that had been left in a machine. And I turned off the TV and I said, come on, let's keep working.
The script took about a year, which, given the amount of research, wasn't insane.
After a year passed, I didn't hear anything. I said to the woman who was running our company, are they aware they don't have to carve it into stone, they can just write it? She said, well, the boys are struggling, but they'll be here soon. About a month later, she walked in and said, I have the script, but I have to tell you, they couldn't make that story work, so they wrote a different script. I said, well, this is crazy. She said, well, look, they wrote the script, you may as well read it. And I read WarGames, and it was fantastic, outstanding. It was a wonderful script.
They read it over one weekend, and they called us up Monday and said, you gave us a very nice weekend, thank you.
So I started taking WarGames around to studios, and nobody seemed to get it. They didn't understand the technology. They said, is this science fiction? I said, no, it's not science fiction. It's probably science fact. The only positive reception I got was at United Artists, MGM, and they said, okay, they would do it.
So then we went about searching for a director, and I knew Marty Brest from AFI days, and I gave him a copy of the script, and he really liked it. And the studio was adamant that Marty was the director.
Marty was the flavor of the month then. He was a very hot young director, and Marty came on board. And we then went about casting the film.
I read it and I really loved it, but I just needed to work and get my foot in the door. So I was also auditioning for and reading things that, were pretty bad. And this one was just really, really good. I auditioned for it for 4 months.
When you saw Allie, you loved her. You didn't know what she was going to be doing in the movie, but you hoped she succeeded. She had that kind of a face and that kind of a smile and that kind of an attitude.
I think she was wonderfully cast because there is, especially in this film, there's a wonderful sense of innocence about her. You want these kids to be getting in a lot of trouble and blameless all at the same time, but inquisitive, and I think it's difficult. And I think they were both very well cast.
I think I really got the part because of Matthew, because I had to come in and we had to sort of sit together and do a little conversation while they filmed it. And I just felt so at ease with him right away. That's why I think I got it.
I read from Marty a bunch of times. Then he wanted to do a test, I think, which I couldn't do. My father told me to suggest that they watch dailies from the movie I was shooting, Max Dugan.
We went over to 20th Century Fox, and they showed us some film, and we were immediately taken with Matthew.
So they used that as kind of my screen test, basically, and then hired me. So I shot Max Dugan Returns, and like a week later began WarGames.
My part was not that big when I got in the original script. Marty changed it during rehearsals, which was great.
In the original script, Jennifer wasn't in the second half of the movie. She just kind of sent him the money that he needed instead of coming. But we all felt, who's he going to talk to? And so she was written into the rest of the movie, thank God.
I think, and I'm not sure because I didn't, I was never in Marty's head, but I think there's a really dark element to this particular story, and I think Marty was focused on that. And this movie could have been darker. It could have been that interpretation, and it would have been amazing, also.
There was a version of the script that Marty Brest developed that was considerably darker. They had, I'm not sure if it was a dream sequence, but they had World War III breaking out. I don't know, it just wasn't the tone that we were going for.
Through the final stages of development, we had some disagreements with Marty. I remember a key moment. We were on the phone, and suddenly we had been arguing about a story point, and Marty and whoever was working with him kind of said, "It's okay, why don't you just try it that way?" Like there was no argument. I hung up the phone, and I said to Larry, "We're fired." If they're not fighting with us, we're fired. And sure enough, about a half hour later, we got the call from our agent saying that we're no longer involved, which was extraordinarily painful, quite honestly.
We weren't really involved after that. We had finished our second draft and sent it into the studio, but nobody on the production had bothered to read it.
We started shooting, and Marty is a very talented guy. He kind of keeps to himself. He has his vision of the movie. And the studio was not happy with the film they were seeing. They thought it was rather simple, not very exciting. And I told Marty, I said, "Look, the studio's not happy." Finally, the studio said, "We want him replaced." I was quite taken aback. That doesn't happen very often in the movie business. It had never happened with me before.
It was very strange. A week or two into shooting, he took Allie and me for a walk and said, "I think I'm not going to be your director anymore after this week." He was very calm about it.
I was horrified. I think both of us felt like, well, we can't do the movie without you. And he said, "Yes, you can. Oh, absolutely you can. You're doing this movie, and it will be a little different, but it's still going to be a great movie." So there's just this feeling of sadness and, oh my gosh, who's going to come in now?
Allie and I were very frightened, of course, that we would be replaced. A lot of actors were replaced.
Strange thing, this only happens in Hollywood, is that Marty's next picture was Beverly Hills Cop, which did over $250 million.
The end of the second week, I get a phone call, and they said, "Well, when you come to work, there will be a different director." And John Badham showed up. John and Marty couldn't be more different.
I had known of John Badham since his days in television, and his work was really outstanding. The studio concurred. We sent John the script.
I got a call from my agent saying, "Oh, there's a problem over at UA, and there's a film that they're not happy with and want you to read it, but I don't want you to do it." And I said, "You don't want me to do it?" He said, "Oh, no, this is nothing but trouble." And I said, "Yeah, but what if the script is good?" The whole film was just brilliantly prepared. And the detail of the research that Marty had done was just exquisite. And yet he saw the Matthew character as rebelling against his parents and an unpleasant atmosphere. And so he took a kind of darker tone.
The way Marty wanted to do it was not accessible in a way. It wasn't as much a popcorn kind of movie, which the movie also works as. So the thing that John brought in when he came in was a lighter kind of quality.
John Badham called me up and said, "I'm looking at a script here that's going to be 3 hours long, and it looks like everyone's had a hand in it, including Willie the gate guard. Do you have a version of the script that you'd like me to see?" And I said, "Yeah, our second draft, no one's read." And he said, "Well, would you send it over to me?" And I said, "You're just down the hall from Leonard Goldberg. He has a copy." And he said, "I'd rather get it from you." So I knew we had a very good director on our hands. I went back, and the script that Walter Parks and Larry Lasker had written was by far the best.
John said to me, "I want to bring Walter and Larry back. I want them to work with me on the script."
We were brought back into the production, and it was a very, very exciting time because we hadn't been anywhere near the studio. I would drive blocks out of my way just not to go near it. And people said, "Well, your movie's getting made." Yeah, but it kind of felt like saying, "Well, at least your girlfriend's being loved." It just didn't feel right.
We were able to pretty much go back and either restore or work on new things that we felt very comfortable with.
In the meantime,
I'm looking at the film and I couldn't put my finger on what was bothering me about what had been shot. And it suddenly occurred to me, they're not having any fun. The scene that had Matthew bringing Allie up into his bedroom, there's something dark and evil about the way they're treating this. And yet, I think if I could show a girl how I could break into the computer and change her grade, I would be so excited, I would nearly be peeing in my pants. So when I actually did start shooting, that was the first scene that we did. But now Matthew and Allie were convinced that they were going to be fired. And they were tense, stiff, and we're 7, 8, 9, 10 takes in, and nothing is happening. And I'm laughing and telling them jokes, anything I can think of just to kind of loosen them up. And somewhere around take 11, 12, 13, they started to have a little more fun with it. Because the whole idea was I couldn't just show them a new version of the scene that was the same or slightly better. It had to be 100% better because everybody was going to be watching it like a hawk.
I think it was a tone change, and I think it was kind of a different interpretation. The kind of way that it was even lit, the scenes became brighter.
Another big difference with John was that I remember we did a take and they were like, okay, we'll go again. And he was like, no, we got it. And I remember the crew being like, let's do one for safety. And he said, I don't need it. So he was from a different world. The speed that he worked at, it was fun.
I remember the first time I heard Matthew say these scenes, they didn't sound anything like the way they had been in my ear. He was almost incapable of a line reading that wasn't somehow fresh. And it was so important because, you know, this is such a technologically dense story.
I was always somebody who could appear smart or nerdy. And I emphasize appear. I thought it was a part that I could play. Like, I didn't feel like it was all that different from me in a way. I had my odd, you know, lonely side, which I thought David Lightman had. I remember them trying to teach me to type, which I didn't know how to do. They also, lucky for me, gave me Galaga that I played at the beginning. They put that in my room. So they said, you have to get good at this. And that seemed the most important part of preparing for the movie to me.
Matthew, he was one of the funniest people I had ever met. And even then, he was doing all this like funny musical comedy stuff all the time, you know, because he loved theater and he's like got this great body for dancing around. And he was doing all of that. I love that. I was overwhelmed by all that technology. I still have trouble with computers. So I got to be the naive one, and it was fun.
We were both new and both open to anything and happy to be there. She was very smart. And I got to know John Wood very well. We did Lady Hawk together very shortly after that. He had done so much stage work and not that many movies or big movies, so he was so much more experienced than me, but at the same time, we were both kind of very impressed by the size of this movie.
There was just one major cast change that John Badham did. He brought in Barry Corbin for the General, and the guy that had been cast as the General became his sidekick.
I'm the guy with the stars on his collar, smoking that big cigar. That cigar is as big as a walking cane. You know, John Badham's father was an Air Force general. I guess I reminded him of his father or something. But you know, there was an interesting thing. They asked an Air Force general what he thought about my performance. And he said, it's unrealistic. That general is 20 points shy in his IQ and 20 pounds overweight.
I was afraid of Dabney because, you know, I've seen Dabney in 100 movies and he knew what he was doing. But he ended up having a really important conversation with me that I will never forget. He gave me this kind of confidence about what he felt like I really could do as an actress.
We also got a gift from my friend and Leonard Goldberg's friend, Tom Mankiewicz.
At one point, John said, we need a new scene. After the point where they leave Dr. Falcon, the movie's going to be a roller coaster. It's going to go faster and faster and faster. I need a moment between Matthew and Allie before the express train begins. But John said, the thing is, I need the scene tomorrow because I know where I have time in the schedule to shoot it, and we don't want to upset the studio by telling them we need an extra day, so I'll just shoot it.
They asked me if I would come on and help out. It was a wonderful screenplay to start with. The one scene I wrote was between the two main characters sitting by the shore.
I think we got Mankiewicz a washer-dryer or something.
NORAD in this film becomes another character, like an actor and so forth, in the picture. That's what's important when you begin to analyze what you're going to photograph and what you're going to deal with in telling your story visually.
In that research on what NORAD was, how it operated, the only thing we could really find was an article in National Geographic that gave a few glimpses of the room, the screens. And then I designed something that was, you know, a little bit more acceptable as a theater.
The sets were built on the largest sound stages on the MGM lot, and the sets went wall to wall inside these stages. That was the main war room.
My understanding is it was the same soundstage where they built Munchkin Land and The Wizard of Oz. It was a wonderful set.
One of the guys at the studio said, the set has to look bigger on film when you're shooting it. I said, well, how much bigger can it look? You know, we can hardly get it in the screen now. And they said, no, this was the studio's idea. On the far, far wall behind all the screens, let's build catwalks and let's put midgets on the catwalks so it'll appear to be much bigger than it is.
WarGames was interesting. It was produced, in the early 80s, and at that time, all visual effects were generated optically and composited optically. And we had the task of creating a war room that had 12 giant screens, unlike any giant screens anybody had ever seen before. And of course, those kinds of screens didn't exist.
We decided, okay, we're going to have 12 projection screens up there. We've got 5 arc projectors on the 5 top screens. We've got 7 smaller screens below, which will all be rear projected.
That meant there were these huge film projectors at the back of the stage and at the front of the stage going in both directions. And they all had to be running in sync with each other. There were also 84 video monitors, which all had to be in dead sync. So now everything has to run together, and nobody had ever tried anything that complicated before.
We had to build a strobe system that was the brightest, most powerful 24 frame per second strobe system on the planet at the time. Every time an explosion would bloom on the screen, the strobe would go in perfect sync with the motion picture camera and with the projector. All of that was controlled from an Apple II. It was an amazing confluence of a lot of emerging technologies.
The idea of having a personal computer was very, very rare. If you had one, it was some huge big box that was slower than Christmas and very expensive.
I'd never seen one before. I just thought it was, this bizarre idea for the movie, just like everything else was.
Greetings.
IMSI was one of the first personal computer makers. It was iconic. It was completely configurable by anybody.
What are you doing?
Dialing into the school's computer.
The biggest fight I had with Mike Fink was in trying to sort out what we didn't need to see. He had every single process. So here's Matthew having to type all of this stuff in, and I'm saying, it's way too complicated. I just want him to be able to go blah, 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 and he's logged in. And, oh no, we can't do that. We have to have all of these elaborate steps. I said, well, if we shoot them, I can promise you we're going to cut them out. It's not really authentic. I said, yeah, but it is boring.
When John Badham came, he was smart enough to know that a lot of people wouldn't be able to read the screen. Originally, it was thought that if you showed the screen with words on it, people might understand, but research showed them that a lot of people would say, hmm? So they started the computer talking.
The interesting thing was when we started to design the robot voice, I went to John Wood and I said, would you do the voice? And he said yes. And I said, we're going to do it in a peculiar fashion. I want you to read the sentences backwards. If the sentence is, hello, how are you? I want you to say, you are how hello. Why would I do that, he says. I said, because in the way that I think that voices are being created electronically in computers, it's a lot of single words that are being pulled out of a database real fast. So if you read it backwards, you have to, say these words very flatly.
Wouldn't you prefer a good game of chess?
I have to say that it was a good decision to do that because it made it accessible to me. I mean, I could hear these sort of like lines coming out of it.
The name of the computer that the Air Force had given it was PSYOP, and PSYOP stood for Single Integrated Operation Plan. And it was the most boring acronym I had ever heard of. It didn't say anything, it didn't tell you anything, and a good acronym should at least have something that makes you remember it. So I said, what can we do here? Whopper came to mind as I fiddled with PSYOP, and War Operation Plan Response, Whopper. It played off the hamburger as well as having a funny image of going whop, 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 like that.
I sat inside the machine with an Apple II, John would be outside with a camera, and he'd say, Mike, make it count down from here to there. And I'd type some stuff in it and press go, and it would start counting. So when you're watching the Whopper go crazy at the end of the movie, you have to remember there was this little skinny guy with a very big mustache at that time, typing away at an Apple II. It was really a lot of fun and tremendous hard work.
The post-process, we were blessed with one of the best editors ever who got an Editors Guild ACE award for his editing of WarGames, Tom Rolfe. If I had dropped dead on the final day of shooting, Tom's first cut you could have put in the theater. Was that good?
We had one ongoing argument. There's an enormous bank-like vault door that swings slowly closed, and John wanted to prolong the suspense. And my feeling was that if you cheated the audience by slowing the door down instead of prolonging the suspense, you were dissipating it. And went over to John, ran it for him, and he says, okay, you can have your version in the television version. And so there is a version that played on television that has the, in my opinion, the correct tempo of the door closing, but not in the theatrical version.
The bulk of the score is based on 6 notes. Da 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 dum. And it's inanely simple. And I remember when I first started talking with John, and he said, well, what is the score going to be like? I went, dun, 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 dun. And God bless him, he said, well, I don't know. I guess it'll be okay.
A funny thing happened at MGM around that point. They decided to bring in a new president. And at one point, Leonard and I are talking in front of him, and I said, well, and we've got these songs coming in that are going to be terrific. He goes, songs? Songs never helped a movie ever. I said, well, I did this movie called Saturday Night Fever that had songs in it, and I seem to remember The Graduate had some pretty good songs. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. So now, all of these songs that we had been working on for weeks all had to go in the dumper.
I remember we screened the movie in a suburb of San Antonio. When the movie ends and the Whopper says,
The only winning move is not to play,
the audience stood up and applauded, and that was thrilling. That was thrilling. When it wasn't just an intellectual discussion, it had affected real people.
We got great reviews, and there was a lot of eager anticipation for the movie.
It was such a strange, fun time. You know, I remember walking in Central Park and somebody saying, hey, you're the guy from WarGames. I just saw it. And it was the very first time I was recognized from a movie.
I knew after it came out that, I was going on better auditions. I know I wouldn't have gotten Breakfast Club if I hadn't done WarGames, because John Hughes saw it, and he wouldn't have had that idea, I don't think, if I hadn't done it.
It was transformative, certainly, for me and Larry. We went on right afterwards. We had a number of ideas that we put into development, like Awakenings. Some we wrote, like Sneakers. And so it really created a little group of movies that we were able to make over the 80s. And it was the springboard to what's been a wonderful run.
I arranged for the Reagans to watch WarGames at Camp David. And because Lou Cannon reported in the Washington Post after that weekend that Reagan came into a meeting of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and said, do you fellas realize that a kid could trigger a nuclear war? And he started telling them the plot of the movie, and the Joint Chiefs said, please, Mr. President, we haven't seen the movie. Don't tell us all about it.